stress gets treated like the enemy, something to eliminate, escape, or minimize as much as possible. But most people who actually study stress will tell you something that sounds counterintuitive. Stress itself isn't really the problem. Your relationship to it is. Today we're looking at what stress actually is, why some pressure genuinely helps you while other pressure genuinely breaks you, and what the Stoics understood about that difference nearly 2,000 years before it had a name. Let's start with a basic but important distinction. Not all stress behaves the same way inside you. Researchers distinguish between what's sometimes called eustress, pressure that sharpens focus and improves performance, and distress, pressure that overwhelms your capacity to cope and starts actively damaging you. The physical response looks almost identical at first. Elevated heart rate, heightened alertness, a surge of energy. What differs is how the situation is interpreted and whether it stays within a range you can actually work with. This is where it gets genuinely interesting, because the interpretation piece is largely under your influence, even when the external pressure itself isn't. The Stoics identified this exact mechanism using their core framework. The event creating pressure is often outside your control. Your judgment about what that pressure means is not. Marcus Aurelius wrote something that captures this almost exactly. The impediment to action advances action. What stands in the way becomes the way. That's not just a nice phrase. It's a specific reframe, treating an obstacle as material to work with, rather than purely as a threat to survive. Here's why that reframe matters mechanically, not just philosophically. When your mind interprets pressure as pure threat, your body responds accordingly. Narrowed focus, defensive posture, resources directed toward survival rather than performance. When the same pressure is interpreted as a challenge to meet rather than a threat to survive, the physiological response shifts. Resources get directed differently, more available for focus and problem solving, less locked into pure defensive reaction. The external stressor can be identical in both cases. The interpretation is what changes the internal experience, and often the actual outcome. This doesn't mean you can think your way out of every hard situation. Some pressure is genuinely too much for too long and needs to be reduced, not reframed. That's a real and important exception. But a significant portion of everyday stress isn't in that category. It's ordinary pressure, deadlines, difficult conversations, demanding responsibilities, interpreted through a lens that treats all of it as equally threatening, when much of it is actually manageable, workable material. Epictetus offers a specific tool here. He taught his students to ask, when facing a difficult circumstance, exactly what faculty or capacity within them was suited to meet it. Facing loss, you have the capacity for endurance. Facing a difficult decision, you have the capacity for reasoned judgment. Facing a hard conversation, you have the capacity for patience. The point isn't positive thinking. It's a specific reframe. Instead of just registering the difficulty, actively identify what internal resource this specific difficulty is asking you to use. This shifts your attention from purely dreading the pressure to actively engaging with it, which tends to reduce the purely threat-based physiological response and increase the challenge-based one. Here's a practical method combining both pieces. First, when you notice stress rising, ask whether this falls into the genuinely too much category, requiring an actual reduction in load, or the ordinary pressure category, which can potentially be reframed and worked with. Be honest here. This isn't about pretending unsustainable stress is fine. Some situations genuinely need less on your plate, not a better attitude about a full plate. Second, for ordinary pressure, ask Epictetus's question directly. What capacity within me is this situation calling for? Name it specifically. Third, treat the obstacle itself as material, using Marcus Aurelius's framing. What does this specific difficulty give you the chance to practice or build that ease wouldn't have offered? Fourth, separate what's actually within your control in the stressful situation from what isn't, and direct your energy specifically toward the controllable portion. Stress that stays diffuse and directionless tends to feel worse than stress that's been sorted into a specific, actionable target. None of this eliminates pressure. Genuine difficulty remains genuinely difficult. But the difference between pressure that breaks you and pressure that sharpens you often comes down to exactly the piece the Stoics identified. Not the event itself, but your relationship to it, whether you meet it as pure threat or as material calling for a specific capacity you already have. Name the capacity. Use the obstacle. That's the whole practice. I'll see you in the next one.